when I tried the same Ubuntu, it is not working. May I know the reason, sir?
Sorry, which assignment?
User data, sir.
User data using Amazon Linux is working, but Ubuntu is not working.
Yes,
So
sir.
what are you trying to do there? Okay, so in Ubuntu, you won't be able to use yum, right?
Yes, yes.
Yum is a Linux. It's a Red Hat flavor Linux command. Okay, all Red Hat, CentOS, Amazon Linux. So all these flavors of Linux use yum. Whereas in Ubuntu, it's going to be apt-get, apt-get.
Yes, yes, sir.
So you have to replace those commands with apt-get commands
Yes, sir.
so that it works in Ubuntu.
I tried it also, sir, and when I tried to install HTTP, it is not able to install it. It is showing you have to install something else from the
Okay.
vendor.
Okay. Do one thing.
Yes, sir.
Provision a simple Ubuntu Linux EC2 instance.
Yes, sir.
Uh, Access the SSH and try installing it manually first.
Yes, sir.
Without using user data, try installing it full manual and
Yes,
figure out which command works there, which
yes.
will make it a successful installation. Note down that command and use that command in user data.
Okay, sir.
Okay, then it should work.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Okay, all right. Let's get started with today's topic. So today we're going to learn more about S3, right? So yesterday what we learned about S3 is the abbreviation of S3 is simple storage. Expansion of S3 is simple storage service. It's an object store on cloud offered by AWS, Amazon, and it has 12 nines of durability, and and you can create a bucket. Bucket is the high level entity, and you can create up to 100 buckets in an account. And if you want, you can increase that limit by asking for the support and raising the increase and raising the limits. And you can upload any type of objects into S3. It can be files, it can be binary objects, it can be anything. And there are IAM policies and ACLs that are associated with an S3 bucket to granularly control access to the bucket. And object versioning is possible on an S3 bucket. And you can make the bucket or the objects of bucket public, which means that it's available publicly, and the interface to S3 is from a management standpoint to upload objects, to deal with objects, is to either use console or use API, SDK, or CLI. Right, so these are some of the mechanisms through which you can deal with manage the S3 buckets. End users can actually access the objects by using the URL, and there is a unique URL that S3 offers, that every S3 bucket offers, correct, and which gets resolved through a DNS query, and the DNS resolution will resolve to the respective S3 bucket, and it will pull the object from that S3 bucket that the URL is requesting for, and it's going to return it. And S3 uses HTTP protocol, and any application or any user who would like to use S3 would need to employ an HTTP protocol and access the contents of the bucket, right? So this is something that we learned yesterday. Okay, so let me just share my screen. And so 1 second, sorry. Yeah, I'm just pulling up my account. Please bear with me for a second. Okay. All right, I'm just going to S3 buckets. So these are my S3 buckets that I have. Okay, so what we're going to do today is let's play around with a bit of, I'm just going to delete this bucket. I will not use this because I created it with, I'm just going to delete all objects. I'm just going to say permanently delete and delete that bucket just to avoid any confusion, because I did not enable the ACL on that bucket. So that's the reason this bucket is not going to be of use to us. Let me just go ahead and delete. So see, it's actually AWS asks multiple confirmations before you perform a delete operation, because they give you a second opportunity to rethink whether you really want to delete it or not. Okay, all right, because once you delete, there's no way you can get it back, correct? So that's the whole reason why usually AWS has this additional checks and balances to ask for a confirmation that do you really want to delete, or do you want to change your mind, or have you selected a wrong entity, wrong resource? Okay, cool. So now this is the bucket that we created yesterday, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this as hello world dot txt. Right, so let me just rename this. Okay, cool. So now what we did yesterday was we created a bucket with certain permissions. We didn't, the permissions that we just did was just to, remove block all public access so that the bucket can be made public. The objects in the bucket can be made public. That's what it says, right? Objects can be public. And what we did was we also enabled versioning on that bucket so that we can upload multiple versions of the same object, and they'll be available. The older versions of the object will be made available, right? So that's precisely what we did yesterday. There are a few things that we're going to do today, right? So first thing is called the bucket policy, right? As I said yesterday, you can granularly control the permissions of the S3 bucket. And AWS makes it, and the S3 service makes it very, very sophisticated and very, very extensive for administrators, right? So for application developers, for operations to control access at a greater, finer detail, correct? So we're going to learn about it. Please go on mute. S3 bucket policy. Okay. Yeah. So basically, if you see, these are some of the actions that you can perform in S3 with respect to controlling the permissions of a bucket and its objects inside the bucket. Okay. So this page provides an overview of bucket and user policies in S3 and describes the basic elements of a policy. Each listed element links to more details about that element and examples of how to use it. Okay. So now if you see, first is resources, right? So what are the resources? Resources are nothing but buckets, objects, various different access points and jobs. You can ignore access points and jobs. These are advanced topics, but for now, buckets and objects, right? So these are the two things that you need to understand, right? So one is the bucket itself, objects that are within the buckets. So these are the actual resources for which you can allow or deny permissions. Okay. Again, as a good Samaritan service, as any other service that AWS offers, which provides very good detailed security, like you take VPC, right, or you take IAM. Even S3 provides a very good flexibility in terms of allowing or denying. Right? You can also allow or deny. In a policy, you use the Amazon resource name, right? So what is an ARN? I explained what an ARN yesterday. What is an ARN? Can somebody explain what an ARN is and how it will look like? It's a very common entity.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
ARN is an Amazon resource name. Every resource in Amazon is unique, identified by ARNs.
Perfect. How does the ARN, how is it represented? At least tell me a few things that ARN contains, if not all.
Like AWS, service, region, account, and resource, sir.
Okay, great, perfect. Thank you so much. So ARN is a unique identifier for every resource that you provision, right? So there are across the world, right? So there are millions of accounts, AWS accounts, right? So it's a huge platform and there are millions of accounts. I mean, just for example, let's take our class itself. We are about 80, 90 odd people, correct? I mean, each one of us have got an account. So you imagine how many more accounts will be there. So there are millions and millions of accounts across the world and billions of resources that AWS would be managing. Okay, not millions, billions. So each resource is uniquely identified. Okay, that is the purpose of having a unique identifier for each resource. A resource can be anything, right? It's resources. IAM user is a resource. A policy that you create is a resource. An Ec2 instance, EBS volume, a key pair. Okay, an S3 bucket. Everything is a resource at the end of the day, right? So that's what is ARN, and each and every resource is uniquely identified. That's how AWS manages this whole platform. Actions for each resource, S3 supports a set of operations. You can identify resource operations that you will allow or deny by using action keywords. Okay, like for example, S3 : list bucket is a permission, correct? I mean, again, for actions, I asked you to look up a IAM action thing, right? AWS IAM actions. If you just go to the actions directory, you will find the actions for every service. Let me search for S3 here. Yeah, S3. Yeah, if I go inside S3, so this documentation will contain what all actions that are defined by S3. These are all the actions that are defined by S3. Create bucket is an action. Okay, create job is an action. Delete bucket is an action. Delete bucket policy is an action. So that's how it works. For example, the S3 list bucket permission allows the user to use the Amazon S3 get bucket. This is the operation. This is the API operation, REST API operation. If any of you are interested in knowing the actual REST API that goes behind the scenes for each and every operation, you can actually go to the AWS documentation, Amazon S3 API reference. This is the API reference guide. Okay, so how many of you have actually gone into the API reference of, say, certain platforms or certain products or certain services that you have, and actually gone in and seen what the API, how the API looks like, what are the signatures of the API? Not just AWS, but anything else other than AWS.
Sir, I have typed in Chrome that I have got some documentation, sir. It's 700 pages. Yesterday, I mean, when we have started IAM, then I searched in AWS. Do we get any documentation? Then they have provided each and every step documentation from AWS, like a
Okay.
book.
Okay, cool, great. Thanks for your curiosity. Continue that. And apart from AWS, have you tried anywhere else? Any other APIs?
No, sir.
No. Okay. All right. No problem. Anyways, you can, if you want to search the APIs, right, of any service, like for example, Google APIs, right? You can just search for Google API. Okay. If you see here, Google APIs Explorer, and just go here. See, these are all the Google APIs that it offers. Let me go and search for, look for the search API, right? And that's what I'm interested in. Yeah, Cloud Search API. Yeah, if I just open this, it has a version here, version 1. Correct. And if you see, these are all the API operations that the Cloud Search API offers. Okay, for example, if you want to upload a media, just click this. This will be the, it uses a gRPC, and this is the HTTP request. Okay, and this will be the body, response body. Okay, anyways, so this is how you go and search for APIs, right? I mean, APIs are the ways to integrate different systems together, right? And HTTP API is something that will be expected out of you to answer during a interview session. Okay, it will be as simple as name a few HTTP APIs that you've worked with. Correct, HTTP REST APIs that you've worked with. So you should not, fumble, or you should not stammer there, right? You can simply straight away, you can say, yeah, sure, why not? I've used HTTP REST APIs of AWS services. Okay, such as for S3, such as for EC2. For EC2, run instances is an API, okay, that you can use. Similarly, for S3, there are a bunch of APIs that you can use. Okay, anyways, go back. Then effect, right? What effect? Either this is allow or deny. That's the effect that you have to specify. If you do not explicitly grant access to allow a resource, access is implicitly denied. Okay, very similar as how IAM works. This is actually an IAM language only. Okay, IAM policy language. You can also explicitly deny access to a resource. You might do this to make sure that a user can't access the resource even if a different policy grants access. Then principal, which is the principal? What is the principal? The actual account or the user or the identity, right? Who's trying to perform an action on S3 on that particular bucket. Then a condition. Condition is you can add more conditions to it, which can control the whole access in a more granular fashion. Okay, so it's an IAM language, okay, but it is very, very customized and very specific to only S3. So that is the reason why it is called as S3 bucket policy. At the end of the day, it is IAM. Okay, but you'll not be able to do this from IAM. Okay, you'll not be able to create this policy from the IAM console and attach it to an S3 bucket. Okay, rather you have to directly go to an S3 bucket, open the permissions, go to the S3 bucket policy and author this policy so that this gets applied to that particular S3 bucket. Okay, That's the way it works. Okay, so what do we see here? In this policy, sounds very similar to what we did in IAM, correct? Very similar, correct? What did we do in IAM? 16th, right? Yeah. Yeah, this is one policy that we created in IAM, correct? It has the JSON format, version, statement, SID, effect, action, resource, correct? So similarly here too, you have version, statement, ID, SID, effect, principle, action, resource. Okay, it's very similar. So let's kind of decompose this and understand what each one means. Okay, but before that, just go through this for 15 seconds or 20 seconds, right? And see if you're able to draw similarities between this policy that you see on the screen versus the policy that you created 2 days back using the IAM console. Okay. So what similarities you see between these two policies that you did? Can someone volunteer to speak about it?
We have actions, effect, and resource. As they are same in both, but here in this we are specifying only certain actions under action, as we can get the object, get the bucket location, and list buckets. Only that certain the 3 actions are given in this, and in that we are giving all the actions as easy to start. Whatever the actions are there, we are giving all that, allowing all that.
Perfect.
And resources also, we are allowing all the resources.
All the resources.
Here
Okay,
we are giving only 2 resources.
Okay. What else?
And we are specifying principle here. That is the user. I don't understand that, sir.
Okay.
In that
Cool.
we did not specify any user. Here we are specifying the user.
Yes. Okay. Correct. Okay. Good job. Okay. So if you see this, right? I mean, if you see the policy that we created, we were actually attaching this policy to a user called RPL user, correct? So, so this policy actually gets applied to this RPL user, which is the principle itself, correct? They're actually attaching it to that. But here, what we are doing is we are attaching this policy to a resource called S3 bucket. So now within that resource, we have to say which principle can access it or not. Correct? We have to say that, right? Which principle can access.
This has resource-based policy permission, and that has identity-based permission.
In a way, yes, in a way. In a way, it's a resource-based permission but it's a special.
You are not audible, sir.
Now we can't hear you if you're speaking. Guys, it looks like a network outage. Stay tuned for a minute or so. Guys, Prasanna sir will be here soon. Stay tuned, guys. I think he got disconnected. He just texted that he is joining back.
Okay, I'm sorry, extremely sorry about that. I had a small internet outage. I'm just back. Okay, let me just share my screen back. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Now.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. I was not sure at what point did I drop off, but anyways, let me start from a logical point. So bucket policy is specific to S3, right? And you can actually specify it at a bucket level where you have a effect that you can specify where it is either allow or deny. And principle is the actual users or the principals who will be affected by this effect, correct? Either allow or deny. And what are the actions that will come into effect through this bucket policy are these actions. You can also give S3 colon star, right? Or you can just give anything there, right? And then you have the resources. The resources, I mean, which part of the bucket that you want to apply, right? So one is the bucket itself, which is this. And also you have to specify the contents of the bucket, right? Either by specifying certain prefixes, certain folders or whatever it is, or certain objects, or you can just say asterisk / forward / asterisk, which means that all the contents of this bucket will be affected by this particular statement, by this policy. Okay, so remember this. This is very, very important. People do a mistake when they create a bucket policy. They just only give this, the highlighted one. They don't mention the top, the one which includes the contents of the bucket. Okay, in S3, you can granularly control the bucket itself, or you can also control the contents of the bucket. So you'll have to use both. Okay, otherwise, if you just only specify the bucket name, you will still not be able to access the contents of the bucket. Okay, that's the way it works. So you'll have to always remember to use these two when you deal with S3 buckets. Okay, all right. So now that's the bucket policy, and there are multiple bucket policy examples that we can actually create. Let me just go. So if you see here, yeah. So this bucket policy is for granting permissions to multiple accounts with added conditions, right? The following example policy grants the S3 put object and S3 put object ACL permissions to multiple AWS accounts and requires that any request for these operations include the public read canned access control ACL list, access control list, right? So if you see here, it's actually adding a canned ACL for which principal for a set of accounts. This is one account and this is another account. Okay, for a set of accounts on the actions as these actions, on the resource as bucket / star, and condition, right? I mean, this is where you can specify the conditions where the string equals. This is basically a header that the S3 would pass, API would pass x-amg-acl when it has public read, granting read-only permission to an anonymous user. So what is an anonymous user? Who does not come with a specific identity, correct? It's called an anonymous user, correct? I mean, when we browse the internet, we browse it anonymously in a way, correct? Unless and until that website needs some sort of a authentication from the user side to be passed, right? Otherwise, it's an anonymous user, correct? So from that perspective, always principal star is anonymous, right? I mean, it's for everybody. Anyone can access it, correct? On the internet, as long as they have the object URL, anyone will be able to access that particular bucket or access that particular set of objects. So here you're allowing for public read, which is star. So always remember, when you give star, you have to have an extra caution on S3 bucket, because when you give allow and star, it means that you're actually allowing anybody on the internet to come and access your objects. You have to ensure that you give only the right permissions. Okay, and if it is really required. I mean, if the bucket hosts your images, if the bucket hosts the documents and things like that, right, which is publicly classifiable as public information, then you have to give it as public. Otherwise, you should never give it as public. Okay. In fact, I'll give you a few interesting examples, right? I don't want to name, okay, but there was one customer, you know, what they did was they actually they were using S3, and they were using an S3 bucket to store some sensitive information. So when I say sensitive information, it is either PII data. What is a PII data? Can somebody answer? What is the expansion of PII? You would have come across this in your computer science
Personal
academics.
information, sir. Personal.
Yeah, correct. Personally identifiable information. It's called PII, correct? So in data classification, always PII refers to personally identifiable information. So where you specify, you know, whether it's a certain specific data is PII or not. So now what is PII? When you have name, when you have demographics, when you have address, right? So when you have titles, and when you have you know, certain personally identifiable information such as phone number, credit card information, right? I mean, some of these are called PII data, right? Usually when websites or when applications deal with this, you know, they have to be extremely careful so that the PII data is not compromised. And there are people out there, hackers are waiting, right, to basically grab any such personally identifiable information which is made available on the internet. What they do is they just take hold of it, and they can misuse it in a number of ways, correct? I mean, in case if my identity is exposed on the internet, I mean, I can get calls from some potential hacker, you know, who can say that, you know, I heard that you're looking for so-and-so product, you're looking for so-and-so information, and he may lure me into a fraud, right? And he may say that, please share your credit card details and I'll credit $1 million into your account. But before that, you have to give me 5 lakhs and all sorts of, you know, false claims will come from them. So that's why it's always important, because the reason why I'm giving this is beyond just teaching the concepts is, you know, tomorrow all of you will, in a way, you know, deal with S3 buckets and security, correct, as cloud engineers. So now when you deal with security and some of these services, right, I mean, you need to understand the implications of doing a certain action. The moment you make it public read, once you allow it to all the principal, in this case, as you see here, allow star, then it is available for anyone and everyone who has got that URL will be able to come and download that piece of information or object. Okay. So in this case, one customer, what they did was they inadvertently, by mistake, they made one of their engineers made one of the buckets public. And what that bucket contains personally identifiable information of citizens of that particular country. Okay, so it's a field day for hackers, right? So it's a field day for hackers, and immediately hackers started grabbing that information, and then this was captured by this was captured in the logs, and immediately they have to revert it back. They have to revert it back and assess, you know, what is the damage that it caused in terms of the amount of data that got leaked. I mean, fortunately, not a lot of data got leaked. It was only a few, you know, users' data got leaked, but that's possible, right? So that's why you have to be extremely careful. And remember this whenever you deal with, you know, any system for that matter, not just cloud-based systems, right? Any system, especially the internet-based applications, you have to be extremely careful and double check with security best practices and ensure that you do the right thing for your customers. Okay, that is the most important thing. Okay, even if the customer says, "Ve chalega, just open it for public," you have to question them. You should ask, why do you want to unnecessarily open it for public? Okay, anyways, so what this does is this basically allows a read for all the principles on the internet. So on what actions on get object, S3 get object is read and get object version. So they can also read multiple versions and get that particular version on so-and-so bucket. Limiting access to specific IP addresses. You can also limit access to certain specific IP addresses. In this case, what you're doing is you're actually using a deny effect. Deny effect to everything, all the principles on all the actions. Okay. And these resources, except, okay, if you see this condition, it is actually the, if you learned gates, right? And gates, or gates, NAND gates, correct? You will understand this condition also. So here you are denying everything to everybody, except when it comes from an IP address. So except when it comes from an IP address. In this case, condition is not IP address, which means that it's allowed only for this IP address range. So only when the request comes from this IP address range, it will be allowed. Otherwise, for all the others, it will be denied. Yeah. So like this, you have so many complex examples of how you can create bucket policies. But what we are going to do now today is to quickly create a bucket policy for this bucket and try it out, right? So what is the bucket policy that we're going to create? I have an assignment for that. Sorry, not this. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to use an existing bucket that I created yesterday. Okay, and upload a few objects to the bucket. This is done. Okay, all right. So now these two are done. So I already have a bucket called my RPL 2021-bucket-2, right? And this has got some objects in it called hello world.txt. Okay, and this bucket is public. Correct. This bucket is public, which means that this is off. The setting is off, which means the bucket is public. Object, I can check whether the object is public or not. I can click the object, go to the object permissions, and I can see here that the object is also public. Okay, which is everyone, right? Public access, it's public. Okay, great. So now I will be able to expose this object, right? So now, okay. So now let's do one thing. I'm going to basically remove the public access to this object, right? Or let this be public. I will upload one more object to this. Add files. I'll just say new file.txt. I'll just add this object. Yeah, I have uploaded this object. Okay, and what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to go and block all public access, right? I'll just make it all block all public access. I don't want any public access because right now I want to control that through a bucket policy. Okay, I've made it all, I've removed all public access to this bucket. So now I won't be able to access any of the objects publicly. Okay. Okay, so now let's do one thing. Let's go to IAM console and create a new user called S3 user with console access and attach a direct policy during user creation as S3 read-only policy. Okay, so now 2 sessions back, I'm going to go to IAM and create a user. Now here I'm an admin user, right? I'm an RPL admin, but I'm just going to create a new user called S3 user. Okay, and then I'm just going to use only the console access. I don't want any programmatic access. I'll just give a custom password as I'll just remove this require password reset. I don't want this. Okay. Otherwise, it's going to ask for password reset the next time. Click on next permissions. Okay. So here, attach existing policies directly, right? I'm just going to say S3 read-only access. This is a AWS managed policy. If you see this, right? It's a AWS managed policy, which is a S3 read-only access. So as a user, I'm only giving S3 read-only access to that and no admin privileges, nothing, right? Which means that I'll be able to access that the service, right? The S3 as a service, right? So, but within that service, within the bucket, what can I do within the bucket is controlled by the bucket policy, not by this IAM policy. That's the difference that you all need to understand. Don't get confused. So this is for this user. I'm just saying which services and what actions will the user be able to perform. Okay, that is the first level of access that I'm defining, access control policies that I'm defining for that user. Whereas within the bucket, how the bucket should behave is controlled purely by the bucket policy. Review and create user. Okay, I've just created a user called S3 user. So I've just created it. All right, S3 user is created. So now what I can do is I can just log in as S3 user. So let me just open another browser window and just say, let me go to the login console and say S3 user. I just created this user. It's a brand new user. I just created it. I will log in. Yes, I'm logged in. If I go to S3, okay, I will be able to see the S3 buckets. Okay, but I won't be able to create a bucket or do anything, right? So because I don't have access, I'll just say new bucket, random stuff. Let me give. I'll just say create bucket. See, to create a bucket, S3 create bucket permissions are required. I don't have the permission to create bucket because I only have read-only access.
No
right?
need to disable Attils, sir.
No, I mean, I'm not getting to that, right? I mean, I'm just showing whether the bucket is, whether I have the access to create the bucket or not. Whether you
Okay,
enable or disable, that's up to you. That's a different topic altogether.
yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, you have to enable NACLs. To answer your question, you have to enable the NACLs, ACLs, not NACLs, sorry. You have to enable the ACLs.
Yeah, sir. Yeah. ACL.
Yeah, you have to enable ACLs. Yeah, but that's not the point that I'm trying to explain here, right? I'm
Okay,
just saying
sir.
if I create a new bucket, whether do I have access to create the bucket or not? Okay.
Okay, sir.
All right.
So, from IAM, what the policy you create is an SCP, and from object level you create an RCP. It's a
What is
service
RCP?
configuration policy and resource configuration.
No. So basically, don't get confused, right? Don't come up with these new terminologies. Okay. So what I'm doing is very simple. I've created a new IAM user as we did on 16th December. Okay. I've created a new user and I am attaching a existing policy instead of creating a new policy. Okay. That's what I've done. I've just created a new user called S3 user and I'm attaching a policy called S3 read-only access. Okay. Which says that this is the policy details, which says it allows S3 get star, S3 list star, and S3 object lambda get list on all the resources. Now, these are the actions. And this policy is attached to a principal called S3 user. So now S3 user can access only S3, nothing else, no other services, right? If I go to EC2, I'm just going to go to EC2. If you see, you get this, you're not authorized to perform this operation. That's what EC2 does. If I go to any other service, right? Like say, for example, if I go to VPC, right? If I go to VPC, I won't be able to access VPC because I'm not allowed to use VPC because my policy for my user, for this S3 user, does not allow access to anything else other than these actions. Okay, do you understand this? Because when you actually go to console, what actually happens? It looks at my user, and it looks at that associated permissions that I have for this user. Because when I click on, say, your VPCs, it should be able to list down the list of VPCs that is there, right? That's an information. So now listing all the VPCs is an action as far as AWS is concerned. Okay, it's an action that a user can perform, listing the VPCs. So now in this case, I have not given that list all the VPCs as an action in the allow. By default, it is denied, right? Implicitly, it's all denied. So now I'm only allowing these 4 actions to be performed for this particular user called S3 user from the console. So that is the reason why I won't be able to access anything else. I can only access S3. I won't be able to access EC2. I won't be able to access volumes. I won't be able to do anything else using this user. The only thing that I can do is S3. That too, what I can do, I can only perform these 4 actions in S3. S3 get star, all the actions that start with get, all the actions that start with list, all the actions that has this S3 object lambda. Forget about this, but for now, S3 get and list is what I can do. So now if you want to understand what are the actions that starts with get and list, you go to this documentation, actions resources documentation, search for that S3, and these are the list of actions. So in this case, I can just type get. Yeah, see, all these actions will be able, I'll be able to perform, whichever starts with get, because what I have is I have get star as the it's a wild card, correct? S3 colon get star, which means I'll be able to perform all the actions that starts with get. Okay, is this clear? Please don't get confused. It's a IAM user that I'm creating with certain permissions for that IAM user. Okay, whoever was asking this question, is this clear for both of you?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, and don't get confused with new terminologies. Okay, I've never introduced SCPs. Okay, and for now, you don't have to, confuse with those SCPs terminologies. Okay, SCP is a service control policy that's used in organization. So please don't get confused. For now, just understand that IAM users should contain some sort of a policy attached to it, and that policy defines what access that IAM user can have. That's all we are trying to do out here. Okay, I've created a new IAM user called S3 user, and I'm saying what is that policy that will control the IAM user. So in this case, I've just chosen a standard AWS managed policy, which is called Amazon S3 read-only access, and I'm using that policy to give access to this IAM user. Okay, that is step 1. Is this all clear? Any confusions on this step? Because I don't want to continue and keep adding more confusion if you're already confused. Please ask question.
No,
This
sir.
is the right opportunity.
No, sir, it's clear, sir.
Clear, sir.
Clear? Okay, perfect.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
Parag,
now,
let me add just one clarifying point. This is on considering IAM as a global function as given by AWS. We are actually creating a sub-user or maybe a user only for this global function. It is nothing to do with my the EC2 instances, the user ID is what we have created, correct? The initial set of exercises, what we have actually done. So this is different module altogether. We are actually creating and defining users only for this IAM, correct?
yeah, so, okay, probably I don't understand your question completely. So
The profiles what I'm creating, how do I differentiate between the set of user created profiles in IAM versus that of the global users or the profiles which I've created for my own EC2 access.
EC2 access
Okay,
is
you
OS
don't have
level.
two different. So you don't have two different profiles. So it's from an AWS standpoint, right? A principal is either an IAM user, okay? At the end of the day, it's an IAM user, or it's a root user. So now, when you create an IAM user, you grant permissions to an IAM user to perform certain actions on AWS. Okay, so when I say perform certain actions on AWS, which is create a VPC, create a route table. I'm just taking few random examples from what we have learned earlier. Create VPC, add a subnet, create a route table, create an internet gateway, modify the route table, create security group, create NACLs, and so on and so forth. With respect to VPC on EC2, launch an EC2 instance, create a key pair. Okay, so these are some of the access permissions that we give for this particular IAM user. So now earlier we never did that granularly because on day one, when I asked all of you to create an IAM user for your own selves, I'd asked you to attach an administrator privileges to that IAM user so that by default you get all the privileges that an administrator would have. It is star. You would get everything. Okay, so now that is the only user, one and the only type of user that we use to deal with AWS. Okay, when I say deal with AWS, to create resources, to modify resources, and to access certain resources on AWS. Okay, so now that is part one. Part two, when it comes to EC2. So now creating an EC2 instance will be done by this IAM user. Provisioning an EC2 instance would be done by this IAM user, but accessing that EC2 instance, IAM user has no role to play in that, in accessing that EC2 instance. When I say accessing, the logging into the EC2 instance has to be done using the key pair that was provisioned when you created the key pair or when you provisioned the EC2 instance. Okay, so that key pair is a different thread altogether, where you create a key pair. Like in Windows, when we provision Windows instance, there's an inbuilt administrator account, right? So now you use that administrator account, but in order to retrieve the password, you use that key pair to retrieve the password and go inside the Windows instance. Similarly, in Linux, there's an inbuilt user called EC2-user. Every Amazon Linux instance has got that user inbuilt. So in order to access and log into that EC2 instance using the EC2 user, you would need that key pair where you use SSH-I key pair, or in PuTTY, you select that key pair, private key part of the key pair, and then you log into the EC2 instance. So that key pair has no relationship with the IAM user that we provisioned. But IAM user is the primary entry point or facade to enter into AWS and to perform any actions within AWS, either through console or through CLI or an SDK or an API, because that is the authentication to log into the AWS console.
Clear. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And so that is the whole reason why you have IAM is a global service, right? It's not specific to a region, right? I mean, you don't create a user specific to Mumbai region. You don't create a user specific to North Virginia region and things like that, right? When you create a user, this user potentially has got can have the scope across the entire global infrastructure of AWS. So now within this, you can control whether the user can have access only to, say, Mumbai region or only to North Virginia region. I mean, through certain policies, that is possible. But as such, the service itself is global in nature. Okay, and now to put things into perspective, S3, right? So when it comes to S3, in order to access the S3 from the console, you need the principal, which is my user, in this case, the S3 user. You need the S3 user. In this case, I have just switched back to the other tab where I have logged in as S3 user. The S3 user should have access to log into S3 and access the buckets in S3, right? Now, let me just make a small change here, right, to the S3 I'll just remove this. For this S3 user, I'm making it a clean slate. Okay, I'm making it a clean slate. There are no permissions given to this user called S3 user. To this user called S3 user. Okay, so now what will happen is the rule number 1 of IAM will take into effect. What is rule number 1? Rule number 1 is
Deny everything by default.
Exactly. By default, deny everything, right? So now if I go back to my S3 user login window, and if I go ahead and refresh this, let's see what happens. Yeah, see, it says you don't have permissions to list the buckets. Okay, it says you don't have access to list the buckets because at the end of the day, this operation that I'm performing, right, to list the buckets is actually an action that I'm performing within AWS. So now I have not given any action or any permissions for this particular S3 user. So I won't be able to do anything. If you read this message, it's very clear. You don't have permission to list the buckets. After you or your administrator have updated your permissions to allow the S3 list all my buckets action, refresh this page. And I won't be able to access anything, right? Access points, multi-region batch operations, nothing. I won't be able to do anything. Okay, so unless and until I have some access to deal with the buckets, I won't even be able to see what buckets are there, what objects are present within the buckets, correct? So now this is the reason why you have to give some permission, some bare minimum basic permission for this S3 user to add a permission, right? So here I'm just going to attach existing policies directly, and I'm saying S3. I'm just searching for S3, and S3 there are multiple policies that are available, such as read-only access, outclosed, full access, right? I'm not going to give full access. So I'll just say next review, add permissions. So right now it's only read-only access. Let's look at what read-only access does. It has list, right? List buckets is one of the permissions that we didn't have earlier, right? So now that is available, right? So if you see list all my buckets, action is covered through this particular action that is there, S3 colon list star. So now if I go and refresh this, yeah, see now I am able to list all the buckets that are there in my account, all the S3 buckets that are there in my account through the virtue of this particular action. Okay, so far is it clear? Because now I want to peel one more layer of the onion and go into the actual S3 bucket policy. So now till this point, what we have done is through this particular user and through the policy that I have attached to this user, I was able to control when the user logs into AWS console, into S3 console, what information within the S3 console that he is able to access and what sort of actions that he can perform. I was able to control till that point. That is the first level. I was able to control through my IAM users policy that is attached. Okay, so that is level 1. So now I'm able to control, and I can actually list all the S3 buckets, and I will also be able to get the objects within the bucket, right? So this is a get operation that I perform, right? Because that is possible because you have get star, right? S3 colon get star, which means get object is a action that you can perform in S3, right? When you pass the bucket name, and if you have the right privileges to get objects, so you'll be able to get objects and you'll be able to list all the objects. So this is list objects. And if I want to get the object, I can just select this and I can download it. See, it's able to download this file, right? So which means that I have get object as a permission. If I don't give the get, then I won't be able to get the object, which means download the object. Okay, perfect. So now let's go back to my admin user and I'll go to the S3 console. So Brother Murli, hope I was able to answer that, your clarification, right? So you
Yes,
wanted to
yes.
understand?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, all right. So now if I go here, I'll just select this bucket, my RPL 2021-bucket-2. That's the bucket I'm dealing with. I'm an admin user, right? Because RPL admin, I'm logged in as admin. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to granularly control the permissions of this bucket by creating a new bucket policy. Right now, there's no policy that is applied here, right? So there's no policy. What I can do is I can, so now anyone who has got access to S3, correct? Now I've created a new user called S3 user. So now I can create one more user called S3 user 1. Okay. And both S3 user and S3 user 1 will have the same set of permissions on S3 because that is controlled by the IAM policy that is defined at the user level, at the IAM level. But if I want to granularly control uniquely for both S3 user and S3 user 1, unique permissions for S3 user and S3 user 1 at a bucket level, then I can use bucket policy. Okay, so now a small example of how you create a bucket policy is, this is again, as I said, a JSON, right? So you can say that allow this particular user, okay, which is S3 user on this particular account, for what actions, for actions such as put object and put object ACL. Okay, so now what you're saying is right now S3 user does not have access to upload an object, okay, which is true, correct? Let's try that out. Let me go and upload an object. Add files. I'll just go here. I think we downloaded something yesterday, right? Image. Okay, let's just select this image, open it, and I'll just go ahead and say upload. Yeah, see, it failed because I don't have access to. Access denied. So if you see this is access denied. You don't have permissions to upload files and folders. Okay, so now we are going to override this behavior through the bucket policy. Okay, so now I'll go back to my admin, and in this bucket policy, I will start typing the bucket policy, or I can copy and paste this. Okay, but I have to make some changes to this. I'll come and show you what changes that I have to make. Okay, so you can go here. Yeah, edit the bucket policy, click on this edit. Yeah, by default, it's going to give you something. Either you can start from here or you can author this in some text editor and come back and paste it here. Right? I'm just going to take the one that I've pasted. So I'm just going to say that allow upload object, or I will say put object, right? So that's the actual term, put object and get object. Allow put object by S3 user. That's the statement that I'm writing. Okay, and here you have to give the principal, right? The principal is supposed to be the ARN of that particular S3 user. So now how do you get the ARN of that particular S3 user? You can go to IAM in another tab, open IAM in another tab, go to the users. Okay, and pick up your S3 user. And copy this ARN, user ARN, come back here and replace this with the copied one, which has this account ID, the proper account ID. This is my account ID, right? So you'll just copy that and paste it here. Okay, that's done. Action, you want S3 user to have additional put object and put object ACL at the bucket level. Okay, because it's at a bucket level, correct? So you basically want to override it at a bucket level. Okay, so you have a set of policies that are defined at the IAM user level where you don't have put in the IAM user, correct? If you go to the IAM and if you expand this, the IAM user has got only get and list. It does not have put. So now through a bucket policy, you are overriding that, because always remember that IAM is a union, right? You have multiple policies coming, being applied for a specific service or resource. Then it will be a union of all of those, right? I mean, we would have learned about union in our max. So it will be a union of all of those. Okay. And it will be a union, and all that applies will get applied here as well. Right. And within that, explicit deny takes the highermost precedence. Okay. So now what I'm doing is I'm overriding this whole thing. I'm not overriding, it's a union, right? So now in this case, it will be these 3-4 actions plus these 2 actions on this particular resource. Whereas in this case, you're not specifying an explicit resource, you're saying all the resources. And you're not specifying a principal, because this is already attached to a principal called S3 user. Okay. Whereas if you look at the bucket policy, you're explicitly specifying which principal will this action and this effect will be applied to. So the principal is S3 user. Okay. And what are the actions? S3 put object and S3 put object ACL over and above these 4. So it will be 4 plus 6 will get applied for this particular user on this particular bucket, right? And now you also have to give the bucket name properly, right? You have to copy this bucket ARN and replace this with the bucket ARN. When you replace it, if you replace it completely, then you're doing a mistake, because you have / and colon, asterisk, / and asterisk, right? Which means that it applies to all the objects within that particular bucket. So now if you by mistake, if you override that whole thing, then you will have an error. This S3 user will still not be able to put object or put object ACL. So you have to make this /*. So remember that. So it's a common mistake that people do. So now when you're doing this lab exercise, and when you see that you're not able to, after you replace everything, after you give the right ARN of the S3 user, right ARN of the S3 bucket, and still, the user is not able to upload files into that S3 bucket, then come back, look at your policy and ensure that you have not missed the / at the end of this bucket name. So remember that very clearly. If you don't do that, you'll not be able to. So now let me just go ahead and save the changes. Okay, so now S3 bucket is controlled granularly. This particular S3 bucket is controlled granularly by using, I'm in the S3 bucket called my RPL 2021 bucket 2. And I go to the permissions tab. Within the permissions tab, there's something called bucket policy. I just edited the bucket policy. I just created a new bucket policy that allows S3 user as the principal to put object and put object ACL as 2 actions on this particular bucket, because this is the same bucket, right? On this particular bucket. So now, originally, my S3 user does not have access to put. So that was the reason why when I tried to upload, I got an access denied. But now let me try to upload it. Just go, let me try to upload it. I'll upload this, open. Yeah, see, now the upload is successful. Okay, you see this, now the upload is successful. Okay, that is successful because in my bucket policy, I have given this put object and put object ACL. I have given this within my bucket policy. Okay, so now it's like this, right? So let me just do a small bit of a whiteboarding, right? Just do a small whiteboarding. So now you have an AWS account. This is your AWS account. Okay, and within the AWS account, I've got a S3 bucket. Let's take this. Okay, I've got an S3 bucket. This is the S3 bucket. Okay. And I mean, not just this, right? I mean, let me draw more S3 buckets so that it's clear. Yeah, I've got so many S3 buckets. Okay, I've got 5 S3 buckets. Let's assume in my account. Okay, so this is my AWS account. Account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Okay, this is my AWS account. I've got some 5 S3 buckets within my AWS account. Okay, so let's just keep this aside for the time being. Okay, so now let me extend the AWS account a bit. I will draw some partition because this is S3. This right side is all S3. Okay. Okay. So now let me also do one thing. Let me create a new user. Okay. This is my user. Called S3 user. And what policy is attached to the S3 user when I created my user is, okay, a policy that is attached is so this is the policy that is attached to the user. IAM policy, right? This is an IAM user. Everything is an IAM user at the end of the day. Okay. Because IAM user is the principal which can access your AWS account. So this is an IAM user. The IAM policy that is attached to my IAM user is written in such a way that it allows S3 get and S3 list. S3 colon get star and so S3 colon get star, S3 colon list star, which means that I'll be able to get all the bucket names, list all the buckets. Okay, list objects is a particular action within S3. Okay, and apart from that, the resources, see, resources are on all the resources, on all the S3 resources basically, because these actions apply only to S3, correct? So which means that on all the resources which has scope as these actions. Okay, that's the way you have to read it. Okay, so that is done. So you're basically allowing it. Explicitly, you're allowing it. Okay, anyways, it allows us what I've given. So you're allowing it. This is the policy which is attached to this S3 user. So now this policy, this user will have scope across all S3 buckets. Because we have given resource as star. Okay, that's the reason why it will be able to perform all these actions across all the S3 buckets, which is controlled by this IAM policy.
which is attached to the user. Okay, so now let's double click. Now I go inside one particular S3 bucket, which is in this case my S3 bucket is my RPL 2021-bucket-2. This is the S3 bucket that I have. Okay, so now I double click on one particular S3 bucket. Then I'll be able to list all the objects, right? So because list objects is part of my allow list as part of the IAM user. Okay, but now I want to only control the permissions only at this bucket level, only for this S3 bucket. Okay, I'm not worried about the rest of the buckets, right? So there could be again another 1,000 buckets in my account or 500 accounts in my 500 buckets in my account. I don't want to control the access to any other S3 buckets. Within the scope of this S3 bucket, I want to control the scope only for my particular S3 bucket. So then comes your bucket policy. Right? So this is your IAM policy. So then you create a bucket policy which is attached only to this bucket, which can control the behavior of this bucket alone. It won't be able to control the behavior of the remaining buckets. Okay, please understand that very clearly. It will only be able to control the behavior of this particular S3 bucket. And this bucket policy won't be able to control the behavior of the other buckets. If you want to control the behavior of this bucket, then you need a bucket policy similar to this attached to this bucket policy. Then you'll be able to control the behavior of that bucket. So here, what is the bucket policy? It says, what is the bucket policy that we have written? So let me go here. Let me go to the bucket and let me open the bucket policy. This is the bucket policy. What it says is effect is allowed, correct? Effect is allowed. What does it allow? It allows actions as S3 put object and S3 put object ACL. S3 put object, comma S3 colon put object ACL. So these are the two actions that it allows. Actions. Okay. So these are the two actions, and resources the same. This bucket itself. This is the resource. Resources, this bucket, and all the objects within that bucket. So that's what /* means. Remember this, very important. The /* means that this bucket and all the objects that are present within that bucket, such as you will have small objects, right? Multiple objects here. These are all the objects that are present. So which means that it can control this bucket in terms of put object ACL, plus also all the objects. These are the objects. Okay, so now when I have logged in as S3 user, okay, and I'm trying to perform some action on this S3 bucket, so it will be a union of all these actions put together. So it will be it's a union, correct? All of us know how a union works. Okay, it's a union of all the actions that is performed here, right? So let me just copy this actions for this. Let me copy these actions for this. Okay, so the union would be at the end of the day, the aggregate union would be this one, which means put object ACL, get star, list star. So all of these are performable on this S3 bucket for a principle called S3 user. This is the principal. All these actions are possible on this particular S3 bucket. So now out of this, 2 sets of actions are coming from the IAM policy, okay, which are at a user level, at an IAM user level, and 2 sets of actions are coming from the bucket policy, which is at a bucket level. Okay, so now you may wonder, right? I mean, why should we then have a bucket policy, right? As well, I can just put this in the IAM user itself. Did anyone have that question? I can put this here itself, right? Why do we need a bucket policy for that? As well, I could have done this and the things would have been a lot more simpler and clear. Why do I need it there, the bucket policy? No, there is a reason.
It will allow all buckets, sir. If we put there.
Yes, yes. The reason. So there is a reason.
Okay, so there is a reason behind that. But the reason is in this case, what you can also do is you can, if you closely notice, there is a principle present here, right? There's a principle present here. Okay. One answer that you gave is perfectly fine, because the moment you add this put object ACL here, then this guy S3 user will have this put object ACL on all the S3 resources. He will have access on all these. Now I don't want this guy to have access for put object and put object ACL on all the S3 buckets. I want him to have access only on this particular S3 bucket. So that's a perfect answer. But apart from that, what I can also do is I can add additional principles. Right now, here the principle is S3 user. Now I can add additional principles such as S3 user 1 and give unique permissions to S3 user 1 through this bucket policy. So the scope of a bucket policy is only within that S3 bucket, whereas the scope of an IAM user through the virtue of your the policy that you define within the IAM user can potentially be widespread across all the resources, all the S3 buckets. That is the difference between why you need a specific bucket policy. Through a bucket policy, you will be able to granularly control the way your bucket behaves and the access that you give to the bucket. Okay, is this clear? Any questions on this? Any confusions? Please get it clarified now itself, right? Otherwise, you'll fall into a trap of why do I need this? Why do I need that? Okay, perfect. So now let's come back. So now let me go and create a new user, right? I'll just create just to extend this interesting thing. I'll go create a new user called S3 user 1. S3 user 1. I'll just make it password. I'll just use the same password. And I'll remove this require password reset. I don't need to reset the password. Here, attach existing policies directly. I will use the same policy, right? S3 read-only access. Tags review create user. Close. Okay, S3 user 1 is also created now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create one more private window. And I'll log in as the S3 user 1. S3 user 1. Yeah. Let me go to S3. Okay, so now S3 user 1 has got permissions. What permissions S3 user 1 has got? Has only permissions for read only, which means that only get and list permissions are present for S3 user 1, right? So if I go to this bucket, my RPL 2021-bucket 2, and say upload, add files, I'll just upload this image, just save, it will say access denied. Perfect, right? So now things are clear, correct? Now there's one more user called S3 user 1. Okay, S3 user 1 who has got only S3 get and list on all the resources, which means that all these arrows would go to all these resources. But now within the bucket policy, I don't have S3 user 1 in the principal. I have only S3 user in the principal who can put object and put object ACL, which means to upload an object. So I'm granularly controlling only principal as S3 user. Only this guy can put object and put object ACL. This guy won't be able to do it. S3 user 1 has read-only access. So that way I can reuse this policy, IAM policy, across multiple users. But when it comes to the bucket policy, within bucket policy, I will be able to granularly control access. So now let's assume S3 user, now management has the management has decided that they're going to swap the roles of S3 user and S3 user 1. Okay, so they don't want S3 user to have upload action, upload permission, and they want S3 user 1 to start having upload permissions going forward. So now what you do, you simply go here, edit the bucket policy, and instead of S3 user, make this S3 user 1. Let's save changes. As simple as that, right? So now what I'll do is let me go back. Let me go back and look at the other user. This is my S3 user. I'll just go ahead and refresh this page. And let me upload a new object. Okay, and I'll say upload. See, now it will start denying the S3 user. But let me go as S3 user 1. Now I'm an S3 user 1. Let me go and upload pipelines.zip and say upload. Yeah, see, now it works for S3 user 1, not for the S3 user, because I have modified my bucket policy saying only S3 user 1 is allowed to perform these actions, not the S3 user. While both S3 user and S3 user 1 are controlled by IAM policies to perform a list of actions on all the S3 buckets, but within the bucket, I'm able to granularly control the access. Okay, so is this clear? Any doubts? Because I want all of you to understand this concept very clearly, right? What is the difference between an IAM policy which is attached to a user directly versus a bucket policy, S3 bucket policy? Okay, so we're left with one more topic. Let's continue on that. Okay. Okay, so this is clear. So I want all of you to do this exercise for today. The next topic that we're going to do is static website hosting. Okay, so now let me ask a very basic fundamental question. What does it take to host a website? Answers, please.
IP address.
Domain.
The web server, a DNS entry, and HTML web
and
pages.
domain. Sorry, just give me a second. I think my headphones are misbehaving. Just a second. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So what does it take to get a website host? Somebody was saying something. Please, can you please repeat it?
Domains.
IP address.
IP address, domain. What else? I mean, these are from a network standpoint, but what other than that?
A web server and HTML page.
Web server HTML page. Perfect. Who's that?
SB26.
Sorry?
SB26.
SB26. Okay. Thank you so much.
Storage space.
Yeah.
Database
So
slides.
correct. See, those are all infrastructure aspects, correct? But bare minimum what you require is, of course, those are assumed, right? I mean, it's given that you need a storage space, you need some sort of a network, you need IP address, domain, etc., etc. But the most important thing, right? I mean, if you have to drive a car, what do you need? You need an engine, correct? Of course, you need steering, you need brakes, accelerators, and stuff like that. But wheels, but you need a engine, right? Without engine, all the others are useless, correct? So now, in order to host a website, you need a web server. That is the most important ingredient of hosting a website. So now, you're hosting a static website, correct? I mean, for example, right? I mean, you're actually starting a organization, you're starting a company, and you need, for the sake of marketing, you need to start a website of your company that says about us, right? What are the services that you offer? What are the products that you offer? And details about those products, right? And price catalog, so on and so forth. How to reach you, right? How to get in touch with you for a business call, and all of that, right? And you'll have some history if you want to kind of give your vision about your organization. You will speak about your vision and so on and so forth, right? It's a website, a static website that you want to build. Or you may also want to run a campaign. Okay, for example, you want to capture details about certain idea that you have, and you want to run a campaign, right? Or these days, I mean, even movies have their websites, correct? When new movies come, they have their own websites, which has a little bit of a teaser about that movie, a trailer, some interesting facts about that movie, right? So all this is to kind of gain more marketing popularity and so on and so forth, correct? So this whole with hosting a website is a major use case for cloud and major use case for organizations adopting cloud, because they need a web server and they need some sort of a infrastructure where they can host their websites in a very secure fashion, right? So now, will you believe that S3 offers a way to host your website? Because you may say that, I understand S3 is a storage service. You can create buckets.
Yes, sir.
You can control the permissions of the buckets. You can upload objects into the buckets. But I mean, it doesn't really sum up if you say that you can use S3 as a web server. But the fact is, yes, it is possible, right? In S3, you create a new bucket and you can transform that bucket into a static website altogether. And when you transform it into a static website, what happens is the whole bucket and its contents become static in nature, and it will be served as if you are serving it through a web server using a HTTP URL. Because at the end of the day, what S3 does is it exposes its objects using the HTTP URL. Right? We have got a URL. If I go to my bucket, if I go to if I open an object, you actually see a HTTPS URL for this object, correct? So now you will be able to host your entire website, which contains your, okay, what all will be part of a website? Can somebody say what are the ingredients of a website in terms of the resources that go inside it?
HTML, CSS, that those are.
Yes, HTML, CSS,
JavaScript.
Front and back end services.
JavaScript. Yeah, forget about
React.
backend for now.
React.
Forget about backend, right? Just keep only the front end for now, right? Because it's a website. That's the reason it's called a static website. It does not contain any dynamic content in it. Right? If you use a database or DBMS or whatever, then it becomes a very dynamic application. But it's for now, I just want to host a static web pages so that people may know about my company. Yeah, so it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, right? Images are very important, correct? I'll have images of my products and I'll have images of my factory or whatever it is, correct? So those are the constituents of a website, a static website. So now in S3, you'll be able to create a static website and host a static website on S3. Okay, so now how do you do it? You have a setting in S3 called enable static website hosting. And we're just going to do that now. Okay, what we're going to do now is we are just going to go create a new S3 bucket and host a website on it, right? So now let me pull up a sample website that I have and show you how it looks like. And then we can host that same website into S3. Okay, so I'd used this earlier, right? I mean, just as a personal thing, you have some sample templates that you can download from the internet, right? I use something called Wavefire. I don't know if it's still there. Wavefire sample website, search for it. Yeah, Wavefire free website, right? You have this here. So if you just go here, yeah, you can just download this template. Okay, it's a free, you can just search on the internet, and as long as it is within the license terms of that content, you may use it. But you have to always respect the license agreements that is offered by the owner of this particular template or a resource, right? So that's very, very important in the internet, right? So because at the end of the day, we have to respect the license agreements and terms that the content owners might have, right? So because at the end of the day, it's a business for them, right? And here, if you see, you can actually understand, what sort of license it has, and accordingly you'll have to use it. But since we are just using it for a learning purpose, I mean, I'm just going to use it and then delete it off, right? I'm not going to use it for more commercial purpose or use it for building my own websites and make tons and tons of money out of it, right? So that's where the whole license terms are very, very important. I mean, that not only applies to these, right? It applies to even images, right? So there's something called stock images on the internet, right? So which are controlled by some sort of a license, right? So there's something called Creative Commons license. And as a photographer, I can click images and I can upload it on the internet, on websites, and people may download it and make use of it, right? So it's called Creative Commons license, but I may also prefer to sell my images for some monetary benefit. So you'll have to clearly understand the terms and conditions, the license terms and conditions of a particular resource that you download from the internet, and adhere to that license terms, and use it in a very diligent and judicious fashion, right? So because this is not going, not only for you, right? So because right now you are in some learning phase, right? So because tomorrow you may get into jobs, you may get into corporate organizations, companies, right? And in such cases, if you're downloading a piece of code, or if you're downloading some piece of CSS, JavaScript, HTML images from the internet, and if you're using it for your customers, you have to ensure that it adheres to the open source licensing terms and conditions. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're putting yourself in trouble, and you're putting your organization in trouble, because the owner of this particular piece could come and raise a legal case against you and your organization and claim for compensation, which may in several millions of dollars. That's why you have to be extremely careful while you use open source and stuff like this. So in this case, I'm just using it just for the sake of teaching you, but I just downloaded this template, and this is a simple zip file. I just downloaded this wave file. Now it has a static set of images in it. So these are all some of the images that it has, right? You see this, it has got some images, and it has got some HTML files, right? And it has got some CSS files. So if you see, these are all the JavaScript files that it has got. Styles contains the CSS files, the framework.css, layout.css. Okay, but if I go to the root folder of my wavefire, I'll have an index.html. If I double click, it will actually open that whole index.html. So if you see this, this is the path that it is rendering this file from. Okay, this is a sample website template that it provides, and you can basically, given within the boundaries of within the terms and agreements of this, you can modify it, and or if you have to buy this, you have to buy this from the particular website. But right now, I'm not going to modify anything. I'm just going to use it for the purpose of demo, right? I'm just going to use this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to host this whole thing on S3. So right now it's a static, right? It's lying in my local laptops folder, one of the folders, right? So, but I want to host it as a website so that anyone and everyone on the internet will be able to access it. Right? Now let's see, how do I access it? How do I host it? Let me close this. Let me go back to my tutorial. First step, just follow these 7-8 steps and you'll be done with this. This is going to be one of your examples, assignments for today. The following instructions provide an overview of how to create your buckets for website hosting. For detailed step-by-step instructions on creating a bucket, see creating a bucket, but you know how to create a bucket, right? So just go to console, create a bucket. So I'm just going here. I'm going to my S3 console and I'm going to say create bucket. I'll close all the other tabs just to avoid confusion. Just close, yeah. And here, just create a bucket and you give a bucket name, right? For example, example.com, but you will not find this example.com. So instead you can say RPL 2021 static website.com. That's the name that I'm giving to my bucket, RPL 2021 static website.com, and choose AWS region as Mumbai. Okay. Then it says accept all the default settings, but you just say ACLs is enabled, correct? Just go and select this, ACLs is enabled. Yeah. Okay. And then what you do is just go ahead and leave all the other settings as it is, and then say create bucket. Yeah. So it's created. So I have a bucket called RPL 2021 static website.com. So now let's do the next step. Step 2 is enable static website hosting. After you create a bucket, you can enable static website hosting for your bucket. So open the bucket. In the buckets, choose the name of your bucket that you want to enable static website hosting. Go to properties. Go to properties. Then you have something called static website hosting at the bottommost of the properties. Under static website hosting, choose edit. Choose use this bucket to host a website, and static website hosting, choose enable. Okay. So I'm just going to click on this edit button, say enable and host a static website. Select this type. And for the index document, usually it's an index.html, right? Even in our case, it's an index.html. If I go back, you will see this index.html, right? So that is the content that is the root content that it wants to serve, or the home document, or whatever you call it, right? So just say index.html and error document, right? In case if you don't have a particular page, right? If the user is searching for a particular page by clicking, usually the web servers throw an error, right? So in this case, if the page is not found, what it does is it will simply throw an access denied or some clumsy page, error page. You don't want that clumsy page to come. Rather, you want to have a custom error document of yourself. You can just create a custom error page and use that error page. But here in this case, I don't have a custom error page. I will just leave it blank there. It's not mandatory. I'll just leave it blank. And then you can specify any redirection rules, such as if you want some redirection rules, for example, if something comes up and some user clicks on something, it will automatically redirect it to another page hosted elsewhere, right? You can do all of that. But anyways, I don't want to do any of those. I'll just click on save changes. So now if you see, static website hosting is enabled. It's a bucket hosting, and the endpoint of that is http://RPL 2021 static website.com .s3 website AP South 1. So this is the endpoint of my website. Okay, that's the endpoint of my website. Now I'm at to make some changes. I'll come back. So now that's the reason you won't be able to access it, right? Even if I try and access it, you'll get a forbidden 401, 403 forbidden error. Okay, so under static website hosting, note the endpoint. The endpoint is this guy. Okay, note down that endpoint, and we'll come back to that. After you finish configuring your bucket as a static website, you can use this endpoint to test your website. Okay, so now edit block public access settings, right? That's important, right? So because now we are hosting a website, which means that I need public access on my website, correct? So block public access. Now, right now it's on, correct? So edit it and turn it off, which means that anybody and everyone will be able to access your website. So save changes, say confirm, confirm, it's done. Okay. So by default, Amazon S3 blocks public access to your account and buckets. If not, if you want to use a bucket to host a static website, you can use these steps to edit your block public access settings, where you go clear the block all public access and click on save changes. It should be something looking something like this. Amazon S3 turns off block public access settings for your bucket. To create a public static website, you might also have to edit the block public access settings for your account before adding a bucket policy. I mean, sometimes, it's a account level setting as well, right? So usually organizations, they block it at an account level so that any bucket that is created and by a mistake, some administrator turns off the block all public access settings, it is not taken effect unless and until it is cleared at the account level. So that's an additional level of security that usually organizations have, right? So now add a bucket policy that makes your bucket content publicly available. So now that you have, removed all the block public access settings, cleared it, but you still have to make your bucket public and all the objects in it public. So now how do you do it? You do it using the bucket policy, right? Like this. right now there's no bucket policy. Now you're creating a bucket policy that will allow all that will allow get actions on your bucket for all the resources. Let us see how to do it. Under buckets, choose the name of your bucket, choose permissions. Under the bucket policy, choose edit. Now this is the policy that you need to give in order to make your bucket public, right? So now let me go to bucket policy, click on edit. I will just replace this whole thing with the content that I copied. So here, public read get object. So what I'm doing is the star is anybody, right? Anonymous users also. It includes everybody, right? Anyone who tries to access this will be granted access on what action on get object, right? So because as a internet user, when I access a website, I need to have access to read that particular web page, correct? So now when I use open index.html, firstly I need to have access to open that index.html, right? So in this case, it's a get object. In S3 parlance, it is get object, S3 get object. And the bucket name, I have to give my bucket name here with /star. So let me copy this bucket ARN. Come back here and paste it. This is the bucket ARN /star, right? Let me just save changes. Yeah. So now if you see, it gives a warning, right? It's not an error. It gives a warning saying that it is publicly accessible. So now the reason why AWS does that is, when administrators look at this, they actually get to see that this is public, and they can quickly check with the bucket name to see whether it is actually intended to be public or not, correct? So now it's public. So now what is the next step that we need to do? Save it. Okay, then you configure an index document. Okay, now you create an index.html that says, okay, first let's go ahead and use this. Okay, instead of using that the other one that I have, I will use this. I will just click this, I will save, and I'm going to go and say that index.html. I'll just save this as index.html. Now I can go to my bucket. I will upload that index.html first. Add files. Where is that index.html? It's here. I'm not going to use Wayfair right now. I will simply create a small HTML. Okay, that's what it does, right? So this guy creates a small HTML, which has a head. My website homepage. Welcome to my website, hosted on S3. We'll simply throw this HTML document. Okay, and I'll say upload. Yeah. So this index.html is uploaded. So now, what is the next step that we need to do? I've uploaded this. Okay, I've uploaded the index.html. Okay, and that's done. And configure an error document. Okay, you can configure an error document that says 404 or error.html or something like that. Okay, so now it's asking me to create a 404. When you enable static website hosting for your bucket, you enter the name of the error document, example 404.html. After you enable static website, you upload an HTML file with this error document name to your bucket, which has 404. And I can actually use a similar one, right? I mean, I'll just go ahead, copy paste this. I'll just do this. I will say H1. Oops. The requested resource could not be found. Error. Okay, I'm going to save this as 404.html. Okay, that's done. I'm going to upload this 404 as well. I'll upload the second file 404.html. Upload it. So now I've got index.html, 404.html. I have to do one more thing. If I go to my static website hosting and edit it, I have only given the index.html and the index document. I'll also give the error document as 404.html and save changes. must also be 404.html. We have done that. So to upload the error document, yeah, drag and drop it. Okay, so now, okay, so now you need to test your website, right? So now you're given access to your, this is the website. I've got my index.html, I've got my 404.html. Under permissions, I've removed the block public access, and bucket policy allows all the users to access my bucket and the objects within the bucket. Okay, so now let me go and try accessing my website. How do I access my website? Using, if you go to the properties under static website hosting, you've got this URL, right? I've already kept it open here. So let me just go ahead and refresh this. Right? If you see this, you got your HTML page created here, right? This is my HTML page, index.html. Welcome to my website, now hosted on Amazon S3. So that's being served here, right? When I access my URL, this is my URL. When I access my URL, I'm able to access this. I'm going to paste this in the chat as well. Anyone will be able to access it. Sorry, Sai Krishna, can you please make me the co-host? Or I will just, Brother Murli, I'm just pinging the URL to you. Appreciate if you could just send it to the whole group.
Okay.
Okay, so if you see this, anyone will be able to access this URL. If you just paste this URL in the browser, you will get this, welcome to my website, now hosted on Amazon S3. It's a simple HTML page. So now I may also test my error document, right? Whether error is coming or not. I'll just say about.html. So I don't have an about.html in my website. Correct? If I go to my website, I don't have an about.html. I have only these two. I have only index and 404. But when I try to access about.html, it will redirect it directly to the error page, which is, oops, the requested resource could not be found and error. So now if you don't have an error page configured, I'll show you what happens. I don't have an error page configured. I'll remove that error 404.html. Okay, and I'll say about.html. If you see, you will get this clumsy 404 not found, right? I want to handle it gracefully, right? So that's the reason why you need an error page. So that if somebody is requesting for some content which is not available in your website, it will simply redirect it to the 404 error.html. Okay, so you have a static website you've created, and the step 7 is test your website endpoint and clean it up. Okay, so now what I can do is I can simply go ahead and delete these two objects. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to permanently delete these two, and I'll use my wildfire or whatever is that, wildfire. Right, I've got this static file, wave file, sorry. I'll upload this entire folder in. Okay, what I'll do is I'll upload, add a complete folder. Okay, I will just add all of this and add this entire folder. Okay, I'll just select that entire folder, upload it. It's actually going to upload this entire set of whatever 50 odd files into my S3 bucket. Okay, but I don't want. What I'll do is I'll just
Actions, move this to the root. Yeah. I'll just move it to the root. I'll move all of this objects to the root. Okay.
Prasanna sir, your voice became low.
Okay, sorry about that. My headphones ran out of battery.
Okay, is this better now?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So now what I'm doing is I'm just simply using that Wavefire, that template that I downloaded from the website, the public website, and I'm just going to use that, right, to serve my all my content, index.html and everything. So now let me just go ahead and refresh this. Yeah, you see, you will get that Wavefire, that whole website. So now you can also refresh it at your end. The URL that Murali sir gave you, just go ahead and refresh that in your browser, respective browsers. Instead of seeing that welcome to my website, you will see this complete Wavefire website being hosted through the static website, through the S3 static website.
Yeah, it's coming.
It's coming, right? Perfect. See how simple it is. Just to, you don't have to, right? And in some, if you have to host a website, you have to buy some expensive stuff, right? You have to buy some server space and all of that, right? But with AWS, it's very simple. You just have an account, create your HTML pages, create a new S3 bucket, and host it on your S3 bucket, all your static content.
Images not coming, sir. Is there any reason?
There are no images in this.
Okay.
These are the images that are there. But apart from that, there are no images. These are all just placeholders, right? So there are no images in it. But if images will be there, it will come. In fact, if you see, all these are images only, right? This email icon, this schedule icon, this phone icon, all these are images.
Okay, sir.
If you actually look at this, you go to these images, demo, so all these are images. This is an image. This is an image. Yeah, all those are small images. They're all images. This avatar is an image. It's a PNG, right? Yeah. Yeah. So exciting, right? So you can simply create a new S3 bucket, and in fact, you will be covered in the free tier itself. Right? You won't cross your free tier from a storage perspective, but when it comes to when people start accessing your S3 bucket, right? Then the number of gets will increase, correct? So which will exceed your free tier when your website is being used. In fact, I'll tell you some interesting use cases of this one, right? So in fact, some customer was telling me, right? I mean, I was doing some conversation with the customer. The CIO was actually telling me that what they did was they were actually wanting to run a campaign for their upcoming product. So they built a small campaign, and they created a marketing website, and then they hosted that entire marketing website on S3. And they didn't expect that the website would be hit several millions of times, because the product became so popular that it was beyond their expectation, beyond their original expectation. So now the beauty of S3 is it scales automatically, right? You host this website on S3, and when 10 users are using it, it supports the 10 users. When suddenly the 10 becomes 10,000, it supports the 10,000. And suddenly the 10,000 becomes 10 million, it also supports the 10 million scale. That is the beauty of S3, right? It scales automatically. You don't have to do anything, right? So now in this case, I didn't do anything. I didn't say that this website will only support 10 users or the website will only support 100 users, right? I never said, and I don't even have access. I don't even have any provision in my S3 bucket to say that limit this to so and so users. But the beauty is it scales automatically. So now imagine the same website, you have to host it on servers, okay, on an EC2 instance or on a server which is on premise at your home. Imagine what is the amount of CPU and memory that you need to give, right? In case if it is just 10 users, you don't worry. You can host it on a T2.micro. Let's take EC2 itself, right? You can host the same website on an EC2 instance, right? You just create a HTTP, you install HTTP and you host the same thing on an HTTP Apache web server, and you just simply copy all this contents to that. That's it. Then you will be the server, the content will be servable over the internet using the public IP address of the EC2 instance. We have done that earlier in one of the lab exercises, right? We installed HTTPD and then we created a simple index.html, hello world, and then we were able to browse that hello world from the public internet using the public IP address of the EC2 instance. You can also do the same thing on an EC2 instance, but if 10 users come, T2.micro will support. If 100 users come, T2.micro will slightly suffer. If 1000 users come, T2.micro will crash. That's it. Then what you have to do is you have to engineer that in such a way that it can't be T2.micro. You have to increase it. And once you increase it, then again, you don't know, right? So you don't know what is the limit. If 10,000 users come, even T2.large will crash. Right? You have to go and size it appropriately and create a capacity in such a way that you are able to match the capacity that is required for your actual end users. So now all that is a headache. But if you go for S3, you don't have to worry about all of that. It scales automatically, right? And it supports. And even if 1 million user hits, end users will not see any slowness or anything of that sort, right? That is the beauty of S3 because it scales automatically. That's why it's a serverless service. You don't have any servers behind the scene. Rather, you don't get to manage any servers. AWS takes care of everything automatically, right? And all that you need to do is focus on your core business, which is building this website and host it on an S3 as a static website and point this endpoint to a DNS. Okay, you can also do that. Okay, you can actually take this and point it to a DNS entry. So once you point it to a DNS entry, then you will have your own domain, right? If you want your own domain to replace this, you can do that with your brand. You buy a domain from, say, GoDaddy, or even AWS gives sells domains through a service called Route 53, and you can buy your own domain. And you can use that domain to replace this whole complex, clumsy stuff with your own domain. You can say that my domain.com/index.html, then this whole content will be served from S3. And you will be charged only for those many gets that you do, that your end users do, right? And so in this case, going back to the example, the customer was actually telling me that, they were having this campaign and, suddenly they had millions of hits, right, on that. And this campaign lasted for about 20 days or so, or less than a month. And for this, their total bill that they got on S3 in order to successfully complete this campaign was a few $100s, not even $1,000, right? It was a few $100 is the total bill that they incurred on S3 to complete this entire campaign, where millions of users used their website during this campaign period for promoting their product, and without any issues, no downtime, nothing of that sort. Okay, that's the power of this S3 static website hosting, right? I mean, if you have a static set of HTML files, and you have a static website and you want to host it, you should always consider S3 as the first choice rather than going to EC2 or any other service, right? So because S3 offers all of these features in a very, very seamless and powerful fashion. Okay, any questions on static website hosting for S3? It's quite interesting, isn't it? Now you can build your own website and put it on S3. Okay, and you can create a small biodata of yourself. Right? I'll give you some ideas. So, you can build your resume on as a static website, as a static one single pager, correct? Along with your photo, along with your educational qualifications, along with all the exciting things that you're doing in this RPL session on S3, on EC2, VPC, and all that. And you can create it as a small HTML page and host it on S3, and you can embed that into your resume, or you can put it in your Facebook page, right? You can embed that link in your Facebook page, and if you have a domain, you can also use that in your domain, right? You can create a CNAME in your domain for this pointing at this, right? Sorry, pointing at this, and you can use that, and you can put it in use it in your Twitter handles. You can use it in your LinkedIn. You can use it in your social media, right? You can do all of that. It's a one-pager bio about yourself, hosted on S3 as a static website. Sounds interesting, isn't it? You can do that. Okay, cool. So, and then finally, you can just go ahead and clean it up using this. So let's get into assignment for today, right? So these are the two, and I've given a bunch of links here. You can read out. You can read later about encryption, data protection, right? You can encrypt the objects in the bucket using KMS keys, right? And yeah, but the two key things that I want all of you to do today is, one is the S3 bucket policy. Use this S3 bucket policy and remember this diagram very clearly as to how the bucket policies work in conjunction with your IAM user policies. Very important. Complete that, and then try to host a static website by following the steps in this article, right? And I'll also give you those two, or you can just create those HTML files. I'm not going to give you. You create these two HTML files by yourself. This is HTML file and the error file. Error file, I just changed this title to H1 to error something. Oops, the requested resource you're requesting is not available. And make it a 404. Okay, and sometimes what happens is, after you upload objects, because anyways this permissions and this bucket policy should take care of it, but sometimes you may also find that the objects are not public, right? You can check that, and in case if the object is not public, and if you're not able to access the website, you can make the objects public. That's okay, but that's not required. When you enable it as a static website, and when you provide this bucket policy, then it is allowed. Don't worry about it. So just follow these steps and you should be done. Okay, any questions on this bucket policy on static website hosting? Can you guys think of any unique ways of using this feature? And come back, not necessarily now, you can come back later.
Sir, if we are creating this S3 bucket, sir. If 10 members user that website, sir, it will be charged, sir.
Yes, correct. It will be charged within your whatever, right? Free tier limits. Okay, let me just go and share my screen back. I'll explain that piece as well. Yeah, if I go to S3 pricing, search for S3 pricing, you will get this pricing page. Oops, why is it going to Arabic? Who knows Arabic? Okay, just back to English. Okay. Yeah, so if you see here, we'll select Mumbai. Yeah, so in Mumbai, storage is like this, right? So first 50 TB. So now hardly your website will be few MBs or maximum. It will not be in GBs, right? It will be few MBs. So don't worry about that. but from an access standpoint, yeah, request and data retrievals, right? So that is where you pay for requests made against your S3 buckets and objects. S3 request costs are based on the request type and are charged on the quantity of requests as listed in the table below. When you use S3 console to browse your storage, you incur charges for get list and other requests, right? Because you remember when you go here and do this, it is listing the objects, correct? So it's making a number of calls to list the objects. So that is a API operation and that is charged. Charges are accrued at the same rate as requests that are made using the API or SDK. Right? When you use it using API or SDK, it is the same thing which is done, right? Okay, so now if you go here and see, okay, so if you see this under standard for put copy post list requests per 1,000 requests, it is $0.005. Okay, whereas 0004 per 1,000 requests for get.
Okay, so if you see for get, it is per 1,000 requests, it is 0.0004. So which means that let me open an Excel sheet and calculate how much it is going to be. So let me just, it is $0.0004 per 1,000. Okay, it's per 1,000 requests. That's what it says, right? It's per 1,000 requests, it is 0.0004. Okay. Okay. So now let's assume my index.html is being accessed, say 10,000 times. Okay, it's being accessed 10,000 times because this is for get, correct? This is for get and select. This is for get per 1,000 requests. So now my index.html is getting accessed 10,000 times. So now the way you will be charged is, so it is like per 1,000 requests, it is 0.0004. 0.0004. So for 10,000, it is this into this by this. So it will be this many dollars, which is it will be $0.004. So now if you make it say instead of 10,000 1 lakh requests, it will be 0.040, which is about 40 cents, right? Sorry, 4 cents. So if I make it instead of 1 lakh, make it 10 lakhs, which is a million, it is $0.4 for million, right? If it is 10 million, it is $4. If it is 100 million, it is $40. So if your website is being accessed, if you have, assume you have a single index.html page, right? And that single index.html page is being accessed 100 million times, then you will incur $40. Okay, that's the way the pricing works, because at the end of the day, it is a GET request, correct? And that GET request is coming from users coming on from the internet. Okay, and similarly, it will not just be in a real world scenario. It is not just an index.html, right? It will be some CSS file, some JavaScript and all that, right? So now usually what happens is browsers cache those, right? Or any CDN, they cache those JavaScript and all of that. So images, and so those will be loaded for the first time. But net, right? I mean, if you have say different assets in your website, and if say there are 100 million times people are using it, then probably you'll incur about say less than $100 or so, right? So now you'll be able to relate it to the customer, who told me, right? So when their request became like several millions, right? I mean, still they got a bill of about a few $100. See how cheap it is, right? It's not that expensive. Imagine you have to host this on an EC2 instance, right? Which will support 100 million requests. Then imagine how many EC2 instances you would need to be running behind the scenes, right? You imagine how many EC2 instances you need to run, and how many administrators would need to manage those number of EC2 instances. I'm sure this cost will be like probably 15 times, 20 times higher. It'll be about $500 or $1,000 if you have to run those many EC2 instances to serve this 100 million traffic on your static website. Okay, is that clear how the pricing works?
Yes, sir. Until 1,000 it is free, sir, for Twitter.
That you have to check in the free tier.
Okay.
You go to the free tier. Let me check the free tier. S3 free tier. Yeah, so if you go to S3,
$2,000 it was there, sir. 2,000 cost.
yeah, how much?
2,000,
2,000, right? 20,000.
Yes.
20,000.
20,000. Okay. 2,000 put request, 2,000 get request.
Yeah, 20,000 get request is free, which
Okay.
means that you can make 20,000 times in a month. You won't be charged beyond the 20,000. For every 10,000, for every 1,000, you will be charged $0.0004.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I think we took a lot of extra time. So sorry about that. I creeped into your
Sir,
lab session. Yeah.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Sir,
Go ahead.
today I got AWS that message. I have exceed 85% of the usage limit for one or more AWS free tier eligible. He's saying that I need to create one more free tier.
Okay, so what AWS does is AWS will warn you if you are about to exhaust your free tier. Okay, so now this is like a early warning to you, so that you have to clear all your resources that you're running and ensure that whatever 15% that is remaining, you use that, because if you hit 100%, you will get charged. So now, as a step one, what you do is go clear all your resources. If any EC2 instance is running, clear it. Any volumes are existing, clear those volumes. Delete those volumes. Any AMIs that you created, delete those AMIs. Any snapshots that you created, delete those snapshots. Clean it up. Okay, it's important you clean it up. Otherwise, this will charge your credit card or debit card.
Okay, sir.
Okay, take the help of your mentor if required. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay, I've just given the assignment. Murli sir will, share it to the larger group. Okay, so what you can do is you can get into the your respective breakout rooms and start your assignment for today. Okay, Sai Krishna, I'll talk to you offline. I'll call you post this on your question about tomorrow. Yeah.
Sure enough.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.